The Constitution is really a great experiment. The Founding Fathers wanted a document that was going to divide, distribute, balance, and protect governmental power and ensure that the liberties and that the rights of the people were also protected. To do this, they were going to institute a series of very important principles into the new Constitution. Of course, they had a little help from those giants on whose shoulders that they were standing, and they knew it. The Enlightenment philosophers, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Montesquieu, just to name a few. But the brave men, the Founding Fathers, were working in unknown and untested territory, the creation of an entirely new form of democracy that would be described by them as a federal republic. In order to go about this experiment, the Founding Fathers would institute a number of important philosophical principles, remember going back to the philosophies of those Enlightenment thinkers, that they would call constitutional ideals. And these are described in the chart that I'm going to show you on the next slide. These 6 principles of constitutionalism are what you need to be looking at throughout the Constitution. The first principle is popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is when people establish governments and are the source of governmental power. The people tell the government what to do instead of governments controlling the lives of the people. Now, how do we know that they had popular sovereignty? Because the Constitution starts with 3 words. We, the people. Sorry, guys, I'm doing this with my mouse. We, the people. Governments must have restricted and highly controlled power so that they do not excuse or exercise tyranny. And tyranny is when a government used unrestricted power over its people. And they were afraid that that was what was going to happen because they saw it happen under Great Britain. Individual rights had to be firewalled. And by firewalled, what I mean is they had to be locked away from those things that could harm them. They had to be protected. And they had to be protected from the government. So the people had to be protected from the government that was supposed to protect it. The separation of powers is very clearly seen throughout the Constitution. Government power is divided among branches. In the United States government, the 3 branches are the legislative or lawmaking branch, the executive branch, which is implementing and executing the laws, supposed to carry out the laws, and the judicial branch, which is supposed to interpret and enforce the law. The next principle is checks and balances. In order to ensure that no one branch of government gets too much power over the others, each branch is given just a little bit of authority so that it could check or restrain some of the powers of the other branches. And one of the things that people do is they get separation of powers and checks and balances mixed up. Separation of powers is simply your branches of government. Checks and balances are things like vetoes and overrides and all the other procedural things that we will see in the Constitution that allow for a check over the other branch. And then you have judicial review. And judicial review isn't even in the Constitution, but it was kind of there subtly. And it isn't very long, just a few years after the Constitution is enacted, that the Supreme Court itself gives itself the power of judicial review. The judiciary, or the Supreme Court and the lower courts that are underneath it, has the power to strike down a law that or another government action that it sees as unconstitutional according to its interpretation. And the Supreme Court is the highest court in the land in the United States. So what the Supreme Court says regarding judicial review pretty much goes. And this is a power that it gave itself. It's not listed as a power in the Constitution. It comes through the process of judicial interpretation. And then there's federalism. Federalism is the powers and the rights of the states being protected and balanced with powers and rights that are given to the national government and to the states, and through a process of division and power sharing and basically firewalling from each other. And we'll look at federalism in the next chapter and how that works. Now, once we have these new governmental principles developed, we have to incorporate them, put them into the Constitution. So once these basic principles of governing are identified, then they were included in the new Constitution. The Founding Fathers, and when I use the term Founding Fathers here, I'm really talking about the people who wrote the Constitution in this case. They believed that if the new federal government could be instituted in such a way as to reflect the basic principles of constitutionalism, then it would work. But it would have to recognize them and stay true to those principles over time. This was a great experiment. Of course, we're 227 years down the road now, and they did such a good job that we've only had to change the Constitution 27 times formally. And we'll talk about informally later. Of those 27 changes, 10 of them were made in the first 2 years of the new Constitution so that we could have a Bill of Rights. This part I like to call short and sweet because that's exactly what the Constitution is, short and sweet. In its original form, the Constitution runs just over 4,500 words. In comparison to other constitutions, this is very, very short. It's a really brief document. But in this document, the Founding Fathers have offered us an outline for how to govern that's incorporating the ideas that have worked for other governments, as well as new and uniquely American ideas that would work for us. It makes our Constitution something that has been the envy and the model of modern democracies throughout history. It serves as a blueprint, and that's what the Founding Fathers designed it for, to be a blueprint for a new form of government. It's written in 3 main parts, the Constitution. The first part is the Preamble. It begins with "we the people," so that we can guarantee that the people are the source of governmental power, and that is where we find popular sovereignty first beginning in the Constitution. It acts as an introduction to the Constitution, and it clearly states the goals and purposes of our government. There are 7 articles, the meat of the Constitution. The first 3 articles deal with branches of government, which is the separation of powers, and the checks and balances are in there as well. But remember, they're not the same thing. The legislative branch is in Article 1, the executive branch is in Article 2, and the judicial branch is in Article 3. Legislative is the people that make the law. Executive is the people that implement and enforce the law. Judicial is the people that interpret the law. Article 4 specifically outlines the American system of federalism, which is the balance and division of power between the new national government and the states, and it also talks about relationships between the states. Article 5 discusses the process that we're going to use in a constitution to formally change or amend it. Now, we've only made 27 changes formally in our history, and the first 10 of those are creating the Bill of Rights. So this document has been fairly unchanged from a formal perspective over its history. And if you compare that to the Texas Constitution, which is well over 50,000 words long and 500 formal amendments since 1876, you can see that it's a really effective document. Article 6 of the Constitution makes the Constitution the supreme law of the land. Article 7 was intended to be used only once and then never used again, because it was what actually allowed us to ratify and adopt the Constitution, the 13 states. And then we have our amendments, which are formal changes to the Constitution. There are presently 27 of those, and remember, the first 10 are the Bill of Rights. So this is a picture of the outline. You have your preamble, You have your preamble, and then you have, so we can check that off, Article 1, which is the legislature. Section 1 of Article 1 deals with congressional power. Section 2, and it establishes a bicameral legislature. Section 2 deals with the House of Representatives. Section 3, the Senate. Section 4 talks about elections and meetings. Section 5 talks about qualifications and rules. Section 6, pay and restrictions, and the fact that you can't serve in the Senate or in the House and be in the executive branch at the same time. Section 7 talks about the legislative process. Section 8 is the power of Congress, the powers that are delegated to it. Section 9 is your limitations on Congress, what it can't do. And Section 10 is the powers that are prohibited to the states. And Sections 8, 9, and 10 are basically all part of implementing federalism. Article 2 deals with the presidency and the executive branch, election, installation, and removal, presidential power, the State of the Union address, the responsibilities to receive ambassadors and execute the laws faithfully and commission officers. Impeachment and removal, which is how we kick a president out. It's never been completely done. Article 3 is your executive branch. That's the justice system and the Supreme Court and the courts. Article 4 is dealing with states, and that's dealing with the relationship between the states and between the states and the federal government. Article 5 is the process of amending. Article 6, supremacy. Article 7, ratification.